Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Matt Stores, and welcome to Mattsplaining. On today's episode, I have a competitor on who is an expert in something that I've always found fascinating. Expert, please introduce yourself and tell us what you're an expert in.
Hi, I'm Bill Bishop. I am an amateur arm wrestler in Arizona. Definitely not an expert, but I would love to talk about arm wrestling, and I thought this would be a really cool idea.
Excellent. I'm very excited to have you on. Even if you don't feel like you're an expert, you are definitely an expert in my mind. My understanding of arm wrestling is that it originated as a means of competition, but it was originally a hand holding competition, competitive hand holding, as opposed to arm wrestling. And people would hold hands, men, women, didn't matter who it was, and to see who would get most uncomfortable holding hands. And then they would let go, whoever let go first. It was like chicken, but for much better intimacy. Eventually people were like, hey, this is fine, but like these games are going on for a really long time. Is there something else we could do with hands to make it a little bit more competitive, a little bit more exciting, possibly something that doesn't take hours at a time? And
Okay.
that's when they came up with the idea of actual arm wrestling as we know it today. But it does have its roots in men expressing emotion and giving love to one another by holding hands. This is most clearly articulated in today's competitive arm wrestling, especially with the popular arm wrestling on the internet, of the men that whisper to one another compliments and encouragement while they arm wrestle. Just the most encouraging videos that you can watch of men in sunglasses just being like, hey, you're going to hurt yourself, change your form, you're going to do great, you're going to do great, I'm proud of you. It's just like, oh man, if you have any issues whatsoever with your family members, this is going to really help deal with it. It's like basically going to therapy, but you're holding hands with your therapist. And then a lot of arm wrestling also has its roots somewhat similar to regular wrestling in the con man dynamic at festivals, on the street, everything like that, where you would have somebody setting up an arm wrestling table and there would be plants in the audience and the guy would be like, oh, I can arm wrestle anybody, I'll beat anybody, I'll beat anybody. And somebody would come up, they would seem weak and small and they would struggle a whole lot, but who knows who would win. And then there's a mark in the audience and they'd be like, I can definitely beat this guy. And then the guy that was trying to get the money out of people would handedly win and beat that person. And that is a beautiful thing. It's a very American mentality, that ability to take money away from somebody because of their false confidence. Ultimately, I think that arm wrestling is one of the best ways and one of the best competition methods to win the love of children, your child's love, if you will. This is best demonstrated in the movie Over the Top with Sylvester Stallone, where some people might say that the prize for winning the arm wrestling competition in that film is a truck that Sylvester Stallone uses to perform his job as a truck driver. But the real thing that Sylvester Stallone wins in that movie, or is trying to win in that movie, is the love of his child after he has a very, let's just put it bluntly, negligent father. And it's through his ability to go over the top of this arm wrestling competition that he is able to win love. And I think that that's what the goal of any arm wrestling match is to facilitate love of the competitors, the audience, and just the people involved in general. Other than that, I believe that it's important to have strong wrists. It's important to understand leverage. It's important not to be allergic to the chalk that is used. I know that some people can have a chalk allergy. It's fairly rare, if I understand that correctly. Based on what you've heard so far, about how much of that would you say is accurate?
So that was a very interesting analysis, not one that I have heard exactly. Overall, though, I think that you hit on a lot of actually important concepts,
Okay.
and I'm just trying to think it over here, but I want to give you either like a C plus or a B minus
Okay, I
because
that's it's a good area to be.
yeah, that it was originally, hand holding contest. My history is not so great, so I don't know that I've studied the origins that far back. It is still like that. It's referred to as competitive hand holding,
Okay.
and it's often admitted that it's an excuse for guys who might not otherwise feel like getting together and holding hands to do so and gaze into one another's eyes, and it is quite intimate, and especially there are some who shy away from the whispering biker that you mentioned,
Mhm.
who is an incredible arm wrestler, by the way.
Mm.
His style of content is certainly leaning harder and harder into very sexual.
I have felt that it was pretty sexual when I first saw it. If you didn't have the visual of if you just took the audio and put it on something else, you would not think that it was arm wrestling.
Yeah, and many doubted his approach, but when you look at how he's received, and I think he probably has some of the most views in terms of up and coming arm wrestlers. It's not a shtick that many have been willing to do on camera. I'll say that.
Mm.
In terms of it is a transfer of love. That's true, but doesn't doesn't help familial issues like you would hope.
Okay.
I think that maybe there are strides left to make in terms of the therapeutic aspects of arm wrestling.
Yeah, there's not
Um,
been a lot of Jungian psychologists who have been recommending people get into arm wrestling.
yeah, and you also mentioned the other type of video that is the more when I got into arm wrestling a couple years ago, the ones where the little guy was just smoking the freaks on the street, conning the money out of people. Yeah, that's the pinnacle for me. I think what most people want to be able to do is taking money is some guys don't like to take money because it feels bad to take the money from someone who you already knew you could beat,
Mm.
but just showing him the levels is an incredible experience. And my competitive record is it couldn't be worse, frankly.
Okay.
I've lost every match,
Mhm.
but man, it was all worth it when I didn't even have to try to take the risk of a 350-pound guy who was moving fridges, throwing him into the back of his truck, just because he didn't know what to do and because he didn't have the wrist integrity that you
Right.
mentioned. And yeah, you really were right on in terms of you need a strong wrist. That's the first thing everybody will tell you. And understanding leverage is a never-ending process in arm wrestling. So
Mhm.
the guys who have been in it for 50 years, who are near the top at the elites, still have vastly different opinions on the strategic aspects of where to apply leverage, and everyone's body is so different that there's never going to be a prescription.
Right. It's
So
you
that
got to kind of have to adapt it to each person as you go along.
yeah, and so that's one of the things that makes it so interesting is one of the best arm wrestlers I've ever talked to, Slick.
Mhm.
He gave me this piece of advice. He said he told me to do something, and I said that's the opposite of what you said 5 minutes ago. And he says, "Don't listen to anybody." And that's very true in arm wrestling. Everybody will tell you what worked for them, and they'll tell you you have to do X and Y, but you really have to also be able to not listen to some of the information, because it's if you go out there and you start learning, there's no end to how much thinking you can do.
Mm.
And at some point, that's a mistake I made. I thought way too fucking much about it. I watched a million YouTube videos and I thought I'd be a good arm wrestler. And here I am still getting smacked.
Mhm.
People will disagree on technique versus strength. But most people agree that it's strength, but it's not strength that you can execute just by choosing to do it, even if you have the muscle.
Right. It
Uh,
needs to be applied strength.
Yeah. And a lot of times when you see a 160-pound guy throw a 300-pound guy across the table, if you open their skin and looked at their pronator muscle,
Mhm.
probably the little guy had the bigger muscle.
Right. Just through use, repetition, the skill, and building those muscle fibers and that muscle knowledge over time.
Yeah.
One question I've always had with arm wrestling, so like you presumably have a dominant hand. How do you like trade off to like use the other arm so like you continue to have balance between the two arms? Or do you just kind of accept that one arm is going to perpetually be stronger than the other?
The meta on what to do with your left arm has changed over the years. Certainly there's a rhetoric out there. A lot of guys call it the party arm, and they don't waste their training energy doing all the exhausting little wrist movements in the gym on that arm. They'll just have fun with it at arm wrestling time.
Mm.
Some of the smartest guys will tell you you don't want to look like some freak, and you don't want to have your back muscles be so imbalanced that you give yourself scoliosis uh, from having one lat that's way bigger. And so a lot of smart guys will say train both, but it is difficult to. There's only so much you can hear people say. Who gives a shit about left? To
Right,
put in the
right.
hours and hours a week on it still.
What happens if somebody is left-handed?
they they still have to arm wrestle right usually.
Okay. Oh, wow. So there's not like a secondary bracket of all left-handed arm
Oh no, there
wrestlers.
is. There is, but nobody only does left for the
Oh, I
most
see. I
part,
see.
except I know one extremely strong puller who it doesn't have a right arm, and he also happens to be one of the strongest left arms in the state. But yeah, a lot. I mean, the Arizona State Fair didn't have a left hand competition, so
Okay.
more official tournaments will have a left hand competition, but it's a separate bracket. It's a whole separate tournament basically.
I see. And how did you first become interested in it?
Man, watching the con man videos. If you see
Okay.
the biggest YouTube arm wrestler when I got into it was he was just called Schoolboy. You might have seen
Hmm.
his video. And he's just they still call him Schoolboy, even though he's 7 feet tall and his shoulders are big as a some guys call him school bus now.
Yeah.
But it's because he has a baby face and his arms didn't look so huge, and especially when he was a little younger, he was this. I mean, he was the youth champ in Russia, but he would go out and just get on an arm wrestle table in on the street somewhere, and $100 if you beat me, and the biggest guys ever would not beat him just because his top roll is actually very very lethal.
Hmm. It's fascinating. Thank you so much for joining me today. If people wanted to learn more about arm wrestling or they wanted to learn more about you, where would you tell them to look?
I would say do what I did and join either one of the global Facebook pages, like arm wrestling discussion, where you can find a local group, or they'll definitely be almost anywhere you are. You can find a local Facebook group and just ask to find a practice and go get on a table if it sounds interesting. If you want to get stronger, you can always get a karate belt and a bucket of rice and start twisting your wrist around in weird ways. But if it sounds interesting, the people in arm wrestling are so much more warm and welcoming than what an outsider would think. And it is so easy to get connected with a local club. If you're having trouble with it, message me on Facebook, William Bishop, and I'll reach out and I'll find you a local club. But yeah, just if you want to watch some of Devin Larrett's YouTube videos, if you're looking for training tips, the best thing you can do, anybody will tell you, is go get on a table.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me. This was really, really informative and fascinating. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
My name is Matt Stores, and this has been Mattsplaining.